This week during staff meeting, we started something new, kind of coming out of a message that I preached about 3 weeks ago, and that was holding each other accountable for gospel conversations that we're having just in our everyday lives as staff members. And by those gospel conversations, I mean introducing God into the conversation, talking about Jesus Christ when we have the opportunity to be able to do that. And as we began to talk about some of these this past week, I noticed the enthusiasm and just the whole mood in the room changed as we began to talk about this, and where we had some conversations with people in our everyday life about Christ and what that looked like. And just a reminder, about 3 weeks ago we talked about this in a message, just a real practical way to do this. A lot of people wonder, how do you get in a conversation about Christ? How do you work that in? We talked about doing this. First of all, think about your conversations you had this past week, and sort of what categories those fit in, whether it's your family or your hobbies or your job or sports or whatever it happened to be. Then think about, how do you tie the gospel to that conversation? In other words, if the subject of how husbands relate to their wives maybe comes up at work, and maybe how husbands and wives sometimes don't disagree, or how they don't agree sometimes, and then how do you handle that? And just think about how God's grace works itself out in our life. And so the guys ask, so how do you handle it when your wife frustrates you or makes you angry in some way? And really to work the gospel into that by saying, you know, my wife and I, we sometimes don't agree, we do get frustrated with each other, but then I keep in mind how God must get frustrated with me sometimes, and His grace toward me, and how out of that also should be grace filled toward my wife. And then just work the gospel into that. You've already started that conversation. There are other ways to do that. But I'd love to hear about your gospel conversations, and if you are on Twitter, you can use hashtag GCon, and that'll kind of let us begin to see how we're each having these conversations in your small groups. Hold each other accountable. Maybe start your small group, your Sunday school class, whatever it is. Just start by talking about, has anybody here had a gospel conversation this week that you'd really like to share? And just begin to gently hold each other accountable in love for those conversations that you may have with people that don't know Christ, and introducing Christ into the conversation. We kind of, to back that up last Sunday, talked about out of 2 Timothy chapter 1, how we cannot be unashamed of the gospel. And so as you are bold in your witness in sharing these gospel conversations, I'd love to hear about what some of those sound like.